the first category of the analysis, with the gameplay category of the analysis, as we begin with these first two opening points that we need to cover. Alright, there we go. We have our new synchronized system with YouTube. Let us begin with that I had already done in the previous two analyses with we did it with Spellforce 1, pretty much. We use this system. Okay, so the analysis will be unified between YouTube and Twitch. Okay, people. Okay. The first 2 points. The genre classification. Remember that I always like to do the genre classification first, since that enables us to then get into the more specific details of the game that we are analyzing. So we begin with the genre classification and another point, which is the one that I'll begin with, actually. The tabletop game that Drakensang 1 inherits a lot of elements from, and that is the tabletop game Dungeons and Dragons. Yes, we cannot begin this analysis without saying that Drakensang is the German version of Dungeons and Dragons, the legendary role-playing game so popular in the United States. This German studio tried to, well, German studio, a group of German tabletop game developers in general, they tried to create game inventors. They created a tabletop game called Drakensang 1 Dark Eye, which mimics, just like the Warlock atop Firetop Mountain, is the British incarnation of Dungeons and Dragons. This is the German incarnation of Dungeons and Dragons. So, tabletop game, and then Radon Labs, the developer of Drakensang 1, took all of the elements of a tabletop game and turned it into the video game that you are watching and the one that we played for 20 days, pretty much. So, the chain of inherited elements, it's like that. Tabletop Dungeons and Dragons, tabletop Drakensang 1 The Dark Eye, and then the video game. The tabletop game turned into a video game. Pretty much. So that's the first point that I wanted to make. This game derives from 2 tabletop games. Drakensang 1 The Dark Eye, directly, and then indirectly Dungeons and Dragons 3.5. And that has a lot of implications. Beginning with the rule set. The rule set, something that I have been mentioning constantly as I analyze this game. The rule set is 3.5. For those of you who don't know or don't know about the tabletop game Dungeons and Dragons, I also haven't role-played with the real tabletop game or anything. Culturally, it isn't a thing where I live, in the capital of Argentina, and in most of Europe as well. So, generally outside the US, playing the tabletop game is not that common. But we need to understand the rules of the tabletop game to see the transition and the implications of that transition that we need to pay attention to if we want to analyze the video game that Drakensang 1 that derives all of those elements from Drakensang 1 The Dark Eye as a tabletop game and Dungeons and Dragons 3.5 as a tabletop game. So, Dungeons and Dragons 3.5. First, let's see at compared cases in other video games. I wanted to begin with this just so everyone has the framework over at YouTube and for the future of what this game tried to achieve and what it represents. The most popular example of a successful implementation of Dungeons and Dragons 3.5 is Baldur's Gate, the father of all RPGs, of all classic RPGs. This genre is called classic RPG, not simply RPG, and even Western RPG would be wrong because that's a reference. You know that I'm very precise with genre classification. Western RPG is also wrong because it makes a direct reference to modern mechanics, and these games don't have modern mechanics. They have classic role-playing game mechanics because they are a direct copy of, with some adaptations, of a tabletop game. Modern games aren't an adaptation of tabletop games because they have action-based real-time combat. These games don't. They use the classic real-time with pause system inherited from the Infinity engine that precisely Baldur's Gate created, the first one by BioWare. Other examples that I have cited throughout the course of my 20 days of gameplay of Drakensang 1 are Icewind Dale directly, Planescape Torment. I also cited Dragon Age Origins a lot because it was a contemporary release to this game. I think only 2 years after, but they belong to the same 7th generation PS3, Xbox 360, and in this case the PC exclusives that were part of that period of time, pretty much from 2005 to 2012 to 2012, something like that, roughly 7th generation. And we could also cite Knights of the Old Republic, of course, 1 and 2. Mass Effect at that point, it already had real-time combat, so no. It's no longer a classic RPG, for example, just so you see the breaking point. Sorry. Just so you see the breaking point, that one has real-time combat, so pretty much it's no longer a classic RPG at that point. Sorry people, I'll need to do this because my throat has been killing me with this stupid cold. So yeah, we'll do it. It will slow us down a bit, but not that much. So we have those games as a reference: Baldur's Gate, Dragon Age Origins, etc., etc., etc. All the ones that I have commented, Knights of the Republic, etc. The classic BioWare line and style of classic RPG games. So what does that imply? Well, we'll get to that once we get into the game. Well, once we dwell deeper into the gameplay category of the analysis. But just as a general introduction, Dungeons and Dragons 3.5, it's an adaptation of the tabletop game to the video game, the opposite of Dungeons and Dragons 4.0, which is an adaptation of specifically World of Warcraft to the tabletop game. It was the inverted path. MMORPGs with tab targeting system like Star Wars: The Republic that we are also playing, or World of Warcraft, are the original idea compared to the tabletop game. When compared directly to the tabletop game, it was the video game first, then the tabletop game. In this case, it was the tabletop game first, then the video game. Let's say traditional approach to an adaptation. The case of World of Warcraft is an exception, and tab targeting MMORPGs. Okay, so when trying to adapt all of those rules, they make some difference. They make some changes to the rule set of the tabletop game, but the core is still there, and it shows. You can see here the real-time with pause combat system that we have, which actually internally has turn-based combat, in which each turn, the difference is that each turn is composed of a set period of time, a set amount of seconds. That is called a round. The same goes for Baldur's Gate. Okay, but we'll dwell into all of those things a bit later. But just the basics of the combat is that 3.5 Dungeons and Dragons inherited from the tabletop game, and it's round based behind the scenes. Everything is kind of like concealed behind the real-time combat that you see. But if you pay attention, you can see that the characters, as they as the player cues actions, they stay kind of like idle some seconds, then execute the action, and then the round is completed. You can see there you can see beside to the left side of the portrait of the characters. There you can see that, for example, the actions have different icons. This is the most basic part of combat. as part of the gameplay mechanics. There you can see that, for example, you have the spells that I'm casting there, but you can see that the third character there, Forgrim, the action that he's executing, see that it's in red. When it's in red, it's because it's finally executing. Some of the actions you will see that they take more than one, in that case, quarter, because there were four of them there queued. Well, there, perfect. Let me pause for a second. There, you can see the attack there that I moved. You could see that I moved there. See that I have my mouse here, pointing at the icons in the reproduction. This is a video that I can pause so I can show you the elements precisely. There you can see that it's just a quarter. For example, this one, it's a quarter of a round, 25% of a round. That's how time is measured in classic Dungeons and Dragons 3.5 in all of the adaptations since Baldur's Gate. There you can see that since I moved that character, because some milliseconds ago, well, there it's casting a spell that only takes one. There, you can see that I'm moving, right? So a round ended, I'm moving. Now I'm selecting the target. And there you can see that until I attack, there will be four, let's say, phases, four preclusive that they need to finish one after the other, four preclusive phases for each round of combat, right? It could be 4, it could be 2, depending on the spell or the action that you are queuing, but the point is that the concept of time is that of classic Dungeons and Dragons, classic role-playing games, which determine the second point that I wanted to make as an introduction, which is the genre classification, precisely because of that element, among others. For example, there you could see another action that's Master Marksman, I believe. Well, there you can see both of them. There you could see I had 2 actions queued, then 1, and they take different times to be executed, right? So there you have it, and that determines the genre classification. This is a classic RPG game. This is not. I think the classification of Western RPG is terrible in this case, because Western RPG, a lot of people call this a Western RPG, and this is a classic RPG. It is true that it's made in the West, naturally, but to be precise, it's a classic RPG because of this concept of time, because it's not completely real time. It's not completely real time. It's real time with pause, and at the end of the day, behind those 4 ticks, those 4 phases of combat, is actually turn-based, because the amount of time for each of those queued actions is a set amount of time. It's not free casting or free time, in which the APM of the player on the keyboard, I know this is very abstract, but the APM of the player on the keyboard or the joystick, how fast I can move a character, does not influence the set amount of seconds that those 4 phases take to execute the action. It's a set amount of time. You see the difference. It is real time, because you don't have to wait turns, but not 100%, because those queued actions, just like in Knights of the Old Republic, just like in Baldur's Gate, they take behind the scenes, in a concealed way, a set amount of time, depending on which spell it is. I know it's very abstract, but it's the core of the genre classification of the game, because then we have people calling this a Western RPG or just an RPG, and no, it's a classic RPG because of how it manipulates time, how it accepts and modifies the concept of time, as opposed to a modern RPG. Think of something like Mass Effect, for example. Mass Effect is a modern RPG, and Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2, they are classic RPGs, because of the difference in this concept of time. I know it's very abstract, but it's the key to have a proper genre classification, because if you don't have a proper genre classification, then it is impossible it is impossible to compare the game to the equal entries of the genre it belongs to. I cannot compare this game to Mass Effect. I have to compare it to Knights of the Old Republic. So the second point that I wanted to make, precisely this one, the genre classification, a classic RPG game. Okay, with that out of the way, let's get into the combat itself. And for that, we need to first understand a very important point, which is the stat system, because we've already covered the concept of how it handles time, correct? How it handles time. So now let's pause here for a second. You can see here that we have a character with all of the details. I think you can see everything, that my camera is not obstructing it. No, perfect. Here you can see all of the variables, that we need to take into account when analyzing the combat system of this game. And you can see that the amount of variables is much higher than any modern RPG, like, I don't know, Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning, I don't know, 1,000 of them here. I don't know, the Elder Scrolls. Morrowind does use that system. There are internal dice rolls, you'll see. The Morrowind would be a very special case. But Oblivion, Skyrim, Fallout, pretty much not. Well, this one, Star Wars Knights of the Republic, this is a classic RPG. Jade Empire, Mass Effect, etc. Or even The Witcher, for example, the first one. Sorry, people. For example, the first The Witcher started as a classic RPG, but the second one and the third one, they are modern ones, because they precisely make that difference. They made that transition. Fable, for example, was modern since the beginning. Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning, Dragon's Dogma, Alpha Protocol, Borderlands, pretty much all of the ones that you can that you have played modernly, they are modern RPGs. And then classic RPGs are Baldur's Gate, Icewind Dale, Neverwinter Nights, great example, Lionheart, we need to play that one, Temple of Elemental Evil, etc, etc, etc. You can see that distinctive interpretation of the concept of time that is the key difference between classic RPG genre and modern Western RPG genre. Classic RPG is also Western, but the problem is that a lot of people don't make the difference based on this manipulation of time, but rather on where the game came from, because they are unable to distinguish the source of the mechanics. And I think that's very, very important, because, as I said, you need to properly classify the genre if you want to actually compare it appropriately. So let's get into the stat system. As I said, in classic RPG games, precisely, the stat system of the game is much more complex generally. Why? Because, as I said with Morrowind, there are internal dice rolls. There are internal dice rolls for each attack, as you will see in a second. So, getting to the spells, first let me get to the spells here with my other character here. Perfect. There we have the spells. There I'm manipulating the spells, for example. I am improving the spells and everything. Well, there you can see it. Oh wait, I need to hover over an effect here. There you can see. Well, perfect. That's a perfect part. There you can see, we'll begin with the spells as an example. Round of combat. We've already analyzed the concept of time. It will take some 4 or 1 or 8 phases of preclusive phases of casting time. But what determines if the spell or the attack, in the case of a melee fighter, is actually successful? Internal dice rolls. Classic RPG games, another huge difference, and hence why we cannot compare them to modern RPG games, is that they have internal dice rolls. In modern RPG games like Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning or The Witcher 3, the combat is real time, And the attack generally has a 100% chance of landing. Generally, there are exceptions, of course, but generally it has a 100% chance of landing in modern games. In these games, an attack working is not warranted at all. At all. At all. It's not warranted at all. So, how does it work? Well, in Baldur's Gate, basically your attacks are compared in a 20-faced or 20-sided dice roll against the enemy's THAC0, which is a stat that is actually an acronym. THAC0 is an acronym to hit armor class 0, the probability of hitting armor class 0, and negative armor of the target, very, very abstract and counterintuitive, because the more negative your armor is, the more chances you have of dodging the attack. Is actually the opposite. This game doesn't do that. It's actually a more intuitive system in which the higher your armor, the more probabilities that you will evade the attack. But well, in the case of spells, both in Baldur's Gate and in here, they don't take armor into account, and they just need to meet the 20-sided dice roll requirement. So you can see that I'm hovering over that spell called Attribute, or Attributo, it's in Latin. Attribute Agility, that enhances the agility of any ally of my party. As you can see, another difference between classic RPG and modern RPG: you generally handle a party in classic RPG games. In modern RPG games, you just handle your character, and companions are automated by the AI, by the CPU. Pretty much, they are just there to provide an extra boost of stats. Okay, there you can see that I'm hovering over this spell, and you can see that as I hover, there are three highlighted. There are three highlighted as I hover over this one. 3 highlighted attributes. The attributes is the basic stat system of the game, and pretty much you distribute them at the beginning and you continue increasing them using your as you combat enemies, you get experience points, and you can use those experience points to increase your attributes, the spell multiplier of each spell, or your base values, and even some other special traits that your character can have, potentially like curing wounds or etc. But well, I want to focus on this one. These are spells that affect attributes. They should have probably translated it better. The game is not properly translated in a lot of cases. But yeah, you get the experience points and you can increase your attributes. Why? What's the point of that? Well, increasing your base attack. That's evident that any idiot can realize that. It's RPG 101. No, it's not only that. The 3 highlighted stats, in this case, cleverness, charisma, and agility, they determine the chance of successfully executing spells. The 3 of them, without any probability of avoiding it. Every time you cast a spell in this game, I know this is very abstract because you don't see it, you don't actually see it, I had to read it. When you cast a spell, there's an internal triple dice roll. You roll 3 20-sided dices related to the 3 attributes that the spell is tied to, that is influenced by. It makes 3 internal dice rolls, and they need to meet the required number of 20. All of them, yes, all of them. Even if one of them does not reach 20, the spell fails. correct, the spell fails. Okay, so what happens if the worst case scenario I roll. Let's begin with the best case scenario, so you get the idea. Let's suppose I roll a 20 on the 3 dice, is something very, very uncommon. It automatically will work. Without any check, all of this could be at 0 and it will work. That's stupid because no one will have the attributes at 0. The minimum is generally 11 or 12 for each of them. Now, let's suppose something a bit more reasonable. That you get, I don't know, you get 9. A dice roll of 9. Or, yeah, and a dice roll of 9. Then, for the 3 of them. 9 for the 3 of them. 9 for the dice roll of cleverness, 9 for the dice roll of charisma, and 9 for the dice roll of agility. Under normal circumstances, it wouldn't work because you need to reach 20, right? For each of them. But as you can see, since it has a score of 15, you have to add 15 to that original 9. You have to add 13. You have to add 14. So it actually would also work because in all cases a dice roll of 9 would still get to 20 without any kind of issue. Now let's get into an even worse dice roll for each of them. Let's get into an even worse dice roll. The worst case scenario. Worst case scenario. Let's suppose you roll. Well, not the worst case. Let's begin with this one. Let's suppose you roll a 5 for the 3 of them. Cleverness, no worries because 15 plus 5 would meet the requirement. Charisma, 13 plus 5, 18 wouldn't meet the requirement. It wouldn't meet the requirement. It would be lacking 2 points of that dice roll. And this one, 19, would be lacking 1 point of the dice roll. Would it work in that case? Well, with the rules that I've explained up until now, it wouldn't. However, that's where the spell multiplier comes into play. These final 6 points in this case are also added by the end of the calculation, to cover those stats that didn't reach. It covers the 3 of them. Cover those stats that couldn't naturally reach 20 with the dice roll plus the natural attribute score of the character. See how incredibly intricate the internal dice roll system of the game is. It's absolutely fascinating how much more complex the math is in all of these classic RPG games when compared to modern RPG games that just compare raw stats and call it a day and all of the attacks land. I've already showed you and classified 3 huge differences between classic RPG and modern RPG, and there you can see the difference, the huge gap of difference in the abstract complexity of the gameplay mechanics just to land a single attack. Well, and we need to take all of this into account because, as I always mention, people, the higher the abstract complexity of the gameplay mechanics, the better, because it enhances replayability. So that's in the case of spells. The final multiplier covers the 3 dice rolls if they don't reach 20. Okay. As you can see, different stats. Let me play it for a sec. As you can see, different stats influence different spells. For example, there you can see that Plum Bam Barm, Heavy Arm, influences different spells. Is influenced by different attributes. We have, for example, that one, attribute of dexterity. You can see it is cleverness, charisma, and dexterity instead of agility. The same for the rest of them. So it's better at the end of the day, and this is very important because it's related to how to mitigate the influence of min-maxing, of spending all of your points on a single attribute, how developers mitigate that. You can see that it's much more efficient to equally distribute your attributes when creating a character rather than spending everything on strength, except if it's a dedicated tank, of course. Except if it's a dedicated tank, because it won't use spells at all, it won't learn spells at all. But there you can see how fascinating it is, how in a very indirect and natural way the game developers managed to encourage a balanced distribution of stats, of the attributes, of the attribute system of the game, of the stat system of the game, rather than encouraging just spending everything on strength, for example. Then you have the base values that you can see the B here because my shield is way too big, but here you can see vitality, the total amount of health, then you have the astral energy, your total amount of mana, let's say, then the rest of the stats. This 52 is the endurance, the green bar that allows you to perform physical attacks as well. Then you have things like the attack score, which is actually the accuracy, the probability of landing an attack, the parry score here. Here you can see that I have two parries, which are 16 and 26, and other stats that simply determine everything. This DB has to be defense value, and the probability of dodging something. Dodge value, sorry, it's dodge value, the probability of directly dodging and not pairing in that sense. In that sense, you directly dodge. And yeah, that RM is the only one that I'm not sure about, I think. It has to be the resource multiplier or something like that. Well, that one, I think I never had to use it, that's why. But well, pretty much the rest of the stats, as you can see, they're all there. You also have bonuses and personal and penalties like willpower bonus and social talents penalty that are determined by something different that I wanted to show you. So let's get to the next tab. Here you have the next tab. For example, there you have vitality. And there I'm distributing my stats. But yeah, that's not the only thing you need to take care of. Before I forget, warriors follow the same pattern. For example, when they perform a melee attack, the attack score here of 19 in this case, the probability of landing a blow, will be compared against first of all, the dodge value of the target, then the parry value of the target can be 1 if the target doesn't have a shield, or 2 if the target does have a shield, and it's compared, and then the armor, of the target. Here I can show you the armor. I think it was over here, a bit before. Where is it? Here. And here is the armor of the target. There's also another detail. So that's the whole process by which the character potentially lands or misses a melee attack as well, including the abilities. In the case of ranged attacks, it's the easiest one. They almost always hit the target because they are not influenced because of all of that shit. You can see that here this ranger doesn't have attack or parry values. It's ranged combat. The RC that there is ranged combat. That's why she has 27, and that's why she always lands. And this one has to be ranged something. Ranged combat has to be this one, 27. So she always ranged attackers generally don't miss because of how the stats are handled. They are handled in a very different way. Another thing that you have to take into account is that this game also includes body spots. Yes, abilities, attacks, not attacks, not normal attacks. Normal attacks are compared against all of the armor, because those numbers that you see there, they are the armor values of this game. And precisely, contrary to Baldur's Gate, the higher they are, the better. The better. They are blue there instead of black, because they are enhanced by a spell. So that's the armor value of the target. And as I've said, the attack score, melee attacker, or ranged combat. In the case of ranged characters, spells generally always land, just like in Baldur's Gate. That's the key of making spellcasters efficient in that sense. The attack value is compared to the dodge value, the parry value, could be single or double, depending on the fact if the target has a shield, and the armor value. If it beats all of those, I think in the case of melee, it's a 6-faced dice roll. If the attack value is higher than that 6-sided dice roll, and it's not then countered by those 3 checks, the attack lands. That's why melee attackers miss most often than ranged attackers and spellcasters, as it should be in classic RPG. Because they have much higher armor in that sense. But as you can see, it's influenced by a lot of things, if an attack will land or not. And this is the core, the heart of the combat. So, very, very interesting. Then we have this other tab, which takes care of special perks that your character can take. For example, the probability of, we'll go over all of them, sneaking, the probability of pickpocketing without being detected and doing sneaky things for a thief. The willpower, in that case, it can counter check some spells in that sense. The perception to detect traps, pickpocket to steal from characters in a very Oblivion style fashion. Dwarf nose to detect gems. The animal lore, the plant lore, survival, you don't need a lot of them. The traps, to create traps yourself. Animal lore, to probably talk to animals. I remember you need to have a very high score. The plant lore, to harvest plants, to craft, to harvest crafting materials, to then create potions. Survival, to pretty much, I think it reduces your chances of being poisoned or some shit like that, or surviving traps or something like that. The Streetwise allows you, it's a very abstract stat that allows you to basically detect vendors on the minimap. They will show on the minimap when you are close to them, so you don't have to manually look for them the first time you reach Furdock. It's a very useless stat. Treat poisons to cure poisons. That one is 100% needed. Treat wounds to basically cure from wounds and critical wounds. That's a point of combat that I'll cover next, because if you, well, you'll see. An arcane lore to identify items and solve some puzzles. Then you have the social skills, use etiquette, haggle to get better prices, human nature to be a bit more empathetic to human vendors, which are most of the ones in this game. The fast talk, to have some extra dialogue options and avoid combat through social influence of NPCs. Then you have the crafting skills to craft potions, then with Bowyer the arrows and crossbows and bows, then blacksmith for the swords and the shields, and then you have picklocks to open chests, and disarm traps to, pretty much self-explanatory, not be hit by traps, but first you have to detect them. Okay, let's get into the combat abilities. Quite important, people, the combat abilities instead of the social traits like there, and social and crafting traits. This one, this is how you also distribute your experience point. Your experience points are used for all of these, also for the previous ones. For the talents they are called, the talents tab. So you use your experience points both for your attributes, for your base values, but also for your talents here, for all of them, for physical, social, crafting, nature, and lore, for all of them, but also for the next tab, which is precisely the combat. There you can see that I'm distributing them. The number in parentheses, it's the cost, basically. As you can see, it's much more expensive to increase your your attributes, precisely because of what I said. It's more important to have high attributes there than to increase the score multiplier of your spells, for example, if you want them to work. Because a single attribute will influence several spells, will influence several things. So a character with all attributes relatively high will be much more efficient at the end of the day, because most spells and combat abilities will work, as opposed to just increasing the score multiplier of one spell that then you may end up not using that much in that sense, because of the efficiency of the effect that it has, or something like that. There you can see that I'm distributing my stuff. Well, here this is my main character. There you can see how the armor is much higher, because another rule of armor is that spellcasters cannot actually wear any metal. They cannot wear any metal, because metal armor, any kind of metal armor, prohibits spell casting, except for the heroes, the main characters' armor that they give you because of the main storyline of the game. It's a blatant exception that they introduced, so anyone can finish the game, even if they don't understand all of these intricacies of the combat system that I have been explaining so far, pretty much. But this leads me to the third tab of the combat talents, in this case, in which you also distribute your experience points, but there's a twist. As you can see, you can, of course, naturally increase. This is something very interesting. You can increase your score you can increase your proficiency for each melee weapon type. In that sense, you can increase your proficiency, and naturally it will be much more effective in combat. It will deal more damage, it will be more probable that you will land the attack. But there's something very interesting. You can see that besides the normal multiplier, besides the normal multiplier there, then you also have the attack value and the parry, the base attack value and the base parry value. And there you can see that you can actually influence the distribution as you level up the proficiency. Was this eraser? You must be thinking, if you haven't watched the game, if you haven't watched my series of the game. Well, you can increase the damage and the proficiency with the weapon, pretty much with the type of weapon. You can also choose if you want a more defensive style or offensive style of combat, meaning that if you invest more in attack value, well, you are increasing the probability of the attack landing. So actually a melee DPS like Traldar, like my two-handed sword knight there, he will land most of the attacks. And in the case of a melee warrior, if you invest more points on parry value, then the second parry is more efficient, and it has a higher value when it's attacked in melee, and the probability of the enemy landing an attack, it's even lower. There you can see that they match. That's because it's this value precisely. This first parry that I have, an enemy attacks, what happens? Well, first the dodge value of 15. First the dodge value of 15, the enemy needs to be very unlucky because 15 is very easy to circumvent. Then my sword parry, this is my sword parry here, that is also relatively easy to circumvent, but then it's already two of them. It needs to get through two of those, even if they are a bit of a lower value. And then my shield parry, which is 26, which is much harder to circumvent and makes it much more difficult to hit my character in combat. And then after all of that, my enhanced armor value will mitigate the damage. That's the idea. See how many variables you need to take into account. Of course, for other characters, instead of swords, the proficiency will be with two-handed swords like Traldar, or with maces and axes for Thorgrim, or even ranged combat for Gwendolite Solon Bow. That one is pretty straightforward, pretty much. So there you have it. You also use your experience points, as I've said. You get them. The adventure points is the total. The experience points are the ones that you get to invest as you defeat enemies and level up. There you have the spells then. The spells, the combat magic tab in that sense would be the correct name. And there you can see different spells inside of, if you look at the description, they explain how they all work. They all work differently with pretty much different casting times, different multipliers, different. There you can see all armor rating zones +1. It increases all of my armor rating in all spots. In all spots, they are called zones because of something that I had to say some minutes ago. Precisely that when you perform a melee attack, it will be directed at a specific zone of the target's body, and it will make the armor check compared to that point of the body armor. In that sense, some attacks are directed to the head, some are directed to the legs, or to the, I don't know, to the arms or whatever, or to the chest, and pretty much the different zones of the body of the armor that the player that the target is wearing, they will be checked against the dice roll of the attacker. So that's a very innovative feature that I haven't seen anywhere else, and I think it should be implemented more frequently, because generally armor value is just one for the whole character, and that is terrible compared to this system. This system has a very, if I had to highlight the best high point of innovation, is the amazing armor system that the game has. The amazing armor system that the game has because of the different spots in that sense. There you can see all of them. There you can see all of them. And as for the rest, I think I covered everything except for the skill tree. There you have the modification with the multiplier. Let me see if I show the skill tree for a sec there. No. Well, there you have Traldar and Thorgrim. Maybe I can find it down here. Anyways, otherwise I have some other moment. And well, that's the high point, the armor system. As for the negative aspect of all of the stat system of the game, in general, it would be the skill tree system. Precisely the skill tree system. That is very simplistic. Well, then I can maybe show it to you. Or do I have it somewhere else? Do I have a frame with the skill tree system, so you have some visual feedback of it? No, looks like I didn't look at it. Give me a sec, people. Give me a sec. because the skill tree system is very simplistic. Let's get to the skill tree system, because I wanted to cover that. The skill tree system at the end of it here. Yeah, I had it here. Don't worry, I know you cannot see. Don't you worry, people. I know you cannot see. There we go. There we have the skill tree system. It was in another video, precisely. Well, there you have it. For example, this is a melee skill tree. You don't have a spell skill tree in that sense. Spells are not modified at all by a skill tree. No, it's just like Baldur's Gate. You use them. They don't have a sequential rotation or anything. You just use them situationally according to what enemy you want to target and how you want to target it. There you have the skill tree of the game. There you can see that you have three basic skill trees: melee, ranged, and defensive. Defensive is very straightforward. The same goes for ranged. Ranged is very small, very small. It's just very linear, like novice marksman and then master marksman, and that's it. That's pretty much it. It's only for crossbows and bows. It's very simple. Defensive, the same. It's just linear, dodge level 1, dodge level 2, dodge level 3. That's pretty much it. And shield combat 1, 2, and 3, and the other one was armor 1, armor proficiency 1, 2, and 3. That's pretty much it. All there is to it. There's one more, but pretty much it's only those three and one more that you don't even need to take to pay attention to. The most complex skill tree that the game has is this one for melee classes, and as you can see, it has two stances over there, offensive combat and defensive combat, and they influence the requirements of the other ones. Is the only skill tree that in which a talent influences another one as a requirement to purchase it, to get to it. As you can see, for example, I don't know, maybe you need defensive combat to get to Wall of Blades from Master Parry, something like that, just so you have an idea. It's the highest abstract complexity that the game will offer, and still it's very low. This is the first negative aspect of the stat system of the game and the combat system in general. A very low point. It's very simplistic, very simplistic, because basically the abilities are improvements of the original three that you get here. So they are basically improvements of those. They are not new. The only high abstract complexity would be that sometimes they have some requirement regarding the stances that you need, but pretty much it's the highest defect that I've found so far regarding the stat system and the combat system of the game. That the simplicity, the how linear and simple the skill trees are. They are shared across classes, so that also destroys replayability. So they are shared across classes. For example, my battle mage had access to these, and the only one that is exclusive is the ranged one. But even so, the ranged one had access to the defensive skill tree. So if you do the math, they overlap a lot, and because of that incredible amount of overlapping, the replayability is completely, utterly destroyed, and I think that's terrible. But besides that, that would be, let's say, not a minor mistake, but let's say middle-sized mistake. But the fact that the skill tree is so linear, it's so linear and simple and shared across classes. On one hand, it makes this game a perfect candidate for those of you who have never played a classic RPG, but on the other hand, it destroys replayability because it lowers the abstract complexity of the gameplay mechanics, and even if you replay the game again, you will use the same skill tree regardless of the class, and it's very simplistic. Well, here you have the example of a tank that For example, there you can see that the parry value is 23 for the weapon and 25 for the shield. There you can see that it's absolutely much more. It's absolutely brutal, much more efficient. Well, that's as for the skill tree and everything. So let me place this here. And as we watch more of the gameplay, let's get into now that we have the combat completely analyzed, after the general classification, of course, as I said at the beginning, and laying the framework, we have the combat now. We can proceed. That was the stat system, to be precise. Now that we have the stat system covered and the internal dice roll system as well, and the skill tree and the talents and pretty much how it handles time in that sense, this game, with the rounds and with the rounds of combat and everything, let's get into more details. As you can see, for example, here there's no combat. I want to show you combat in action. For example, there you can see that I'm casting the spells and everything. Let's get into the next element, the party system. The party system of a game. As a classic RPG, this game, as you can see, I have 4 characters plus a summon there, plus a summon. My bear wasn't at max level yet there, but doesn't matter. But as you can see, you have to handle a party of 4. A party of 4. Now, there you can see that I'm casting a spell, that I'm fighting there, some fire spirits, something like that. There you can see that, for example, this character is wounded, or they can be poisoned. In a couple of minutes you will see poison because it'll be the fight against the Grown King. In this game, we have to address the predominance of states, not stats, states. Basically 2. Being wounded and being poisoned. Pretty much the only 2 that you will encounter in this game. And the party-based system. In this game, you don't manage and how strict the role assignment is in that sense. So you have a party of 4 maximum characters plus a summon, and also you can have a guest character in some specific cases. You can have a 6th character, a guest character. But yeah, generally you manage a party of 4 characters plus a summon. In that sense, the role assignment is strict. It's strict for Dungeons & Dragons 3.5, except for your main character hero unit, let's say, except for the character that you make. That's a very distinctive difference with Baldur's Gate. Because in Baldur's Gate, I remember I played Sorcerer, precisely. I always play Sorcerer. The people from Star Wars: The Old Republic will get the joke because I play Sorcerer, precisely. So I play the Sorcerer, and that's kind of like a hard commit. Like, you cannot be a tank if you are a Sorcerer. Like, you will be squishy in that sense, not only in Star Wars: The Old Republic, but in Baldur's Gate precisely. If you commit to be a Sorcerer, even if it is Dungeons & Dragons 3.5, you will be squishy most of the time. You will need a lot of defensive spells to counter that, and still you won't be able to equip the most powerful armor. So in this game, that is respected, but it's still, except for the main character, just like in Dragon Age Origins. In Dragon Age Origins, for example, the spellcasters can be battle mages. In that sense, Dragon Age Origins is the most versatile system, I would say, out of the 3. If we are comparing Baldur's Gate, this game, and Dragon Age Origins, is Dragon Age Origins. But for example, Knights of the Old Republic, it's a bit more strict in that sense. Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2. If you are a consular, you will take the damage against a melee attacker, and yes, in Baldur's Gate the same. You will be squishy, without a doubt. So in this game, except for the hero unit, the archer was very squishy, without a doubt. I played with an artificial intelligence modified mod, pretty much with an artificial intelligence mod that enhanced the CPU, and they targeted the weakest link of the chain, and they always went for the archer, and it was quite efficient. So in that sense, yes, the role assignment is strict. A tank is a tank, and a DPS it's a DPS. Even, and the proof of the of the fact that this game has a bit more of a strict role assignment than the average Dungeons and Dragons 3.5 is that um, this character in particular, or this one that you can see here, Traldar, which is a melee DPS with a double-handed sword, even if it has the highest armor possible, it's still pretty much squishy. It's still pretty much squishy, even if it has the heaviest armor possible, because it's not casting spells, so there was no point in giving him any other armor that wasn't the heaviest armor. So even if it had even if that character had the heaviest armor, it was still squishy. So a tank is a tank, a DPS is a DPS. It has a relatively much more strict role assignment than the average Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 in that sense, especially modern entries from the 7th generation, especially when directly compared to Dragon Age Origins, in that sense. Well, you have to manage a party, you have to use rolls efficiently, keeping your squishy ranged attackers that deal a lot of damage. For example, Wendala won't miss attacks, the archer won't miss attacks in compensation for being so squishy, and she can summon she can cast a summon in that sense, that bear that you see. So yes, the role assignment on average is strict here. It's more strict in comparison to the average classic RPG in that sense. Well, as for the rest, as I've said, you can be poisoned or wounded. You can be poisoned or wounded in that sense. And in this game, it's not just some 5 seconds. Yet another difference. I think it's the 5th difference with modern RPGs. In this game, it's not just some seconds of poison and that's it. No. Being wounded in the same, for example, there you can see those 2 stacks of broken bones there. Well, it lowers all of your stats. Even only 1 stack of being wounded lowers all of your stats, and since the stats influence spell casting and the probability of your attacks landing as well, it's all negative. The whole character is negatively impacted because it affects the stat system. So the stacks can get up to 5, and at 5 stacks of being wounded, your character is knocked unconscious, even if he's at full health. And that is one of the keys and one of the majestic features of this game that make the first boss, Mother Radzinski, that a viewer asked me over at YouTube, that can make the game so fascinating. Because there, the difficulty of the combat is influenced by the stat system through a state condition rather than raw damage. The difficulty doesn't come from the raw damage of Mother Radzinski, in that case, of that first boss that was the best in the game, in my opinion, because of how it was handled compared to the stat system of the game. And yes, because of the derived influence of that poison, of that critical wound, of state management, because of how that is handled, the difficulty derives from the state from the states that you can be affected by, because they affect your stat system, the stat system of the game. They affect your stats, and you cannot cast spells or land blows. It's amazing that difficulty is derived from such a subtle element instead of the raw stats of the boss. For example, Mother Ratzinski having a million strength and killing you in one blow. In that sense, that's the easy path to create difficulty. The difficult path is doing this and properly combining all of the elements of the gameplay mechanics in a perfect influence on the stat system of the game, so they increase the difficulty. In that sense, the efficiency of the relationship between the states, pretty much the poisoning and the wounding that the boss can apply, and the stat system of the game. The efficiency of that relationship derives into a higher abstract complexity of the gameplay mechanics, and it enhances difficulty naturally, organically, in a very natural way. It's the correct way, objectively, of enhancing difficulty, rather than just increasing the stats of a boss so it kills you in 2 blows. Right? That's the easy path. It's a brute path. It's a less refined technique in that sense. And clearly the developers of this game, even if it was their first entry, they had practiced a lot, and they were prolific. They were proficient with the genre, in that sense. Masters of the genre, without a doubt. In that sense, if their first game was this good, I don't imagine the second one. So, even if it has those defects that I commented, the simplicity and linearity of the skill tree, the difficulty is properly derived from several elements, not only the one that I mentioned, the influence of the states, let's call it the state system instead of the stat system, in that sense, because the stat system is what it affects, but the states that the bosses apply, the poison and the wounding, are the ones that establish that efficient relationship. Not only derived from the states, but also the legendary element of the analysis. All viewers of the channel must know this: the influence of the level design on the gameplay mechanics, people. Yes, this game has a very good influence of the level design on the gameplay mechanics. Specifically, I wanted to showcase this fight because, as you can see there, I'm using my character. It's not a coincidence that I chose this one. There you can see that I have to destroy that grown crystal to stop the endless spawning of those groans that deal poison damage. And as you can see, once the crystal is destroyed, they no longer spawn. But there you can see another great example of the level design influencing the gameplay mechanics and deriving the difficulty from that. There you can see that I had to sacrifice my main character to destroy the crystal, because otherwise the groans would keep spawning endlessly. By this time I had already figured out the mechanic, but yes, that's a very small example of perfect influence of the level design on the gameplay mechanics. Another example that we could cite is how narrow some of the passages are, how narrow some of the areas in which you fight are, and you don't have a lot of room to maneuver most of the time in dungeons, and because of that the spellcasting time is limited, and because of that your spellcaster can be surrounded and killed and cause a whole group wipe due to the fact that you lost your main AoE damage attacker pretty much. Okay, your AoE and your hardest hitting character, in that sense. The same goes for Gwendolyn, even if it's not AoE. They can kill your archer, and it's the one dishing out the most damage and casting the summon that you require to properly defend against huge groups of enemies, for example. Just so you have an example, people. Some examples. So yes, pretty much in that sense, influence of the level design on the gameplay mechanics, efficiency in the relationship between the state system of the game, being wounded or poisoned, and the stat system of the game, that it affects all of the stats, all incredible inventions of this game. As for the rest in terms of the gameplay and the combat, the strict role assignment, the summons, pretty much all of the skill tabs, we've covered pretty much everything. You can put you have stances here that you can put them on defensive or offensive. These ones engage automatically. Defensive, it remains still until you issue the order. For melee attackers, these icons that you see here are the defensive and offensive styles. The defensive style consumes endurance. Yeah, the economic system of the combat gameplay mechanics. Yes, I knew I was forgetting about something. You consume endurance for the melee abilities, and you consume astral energy, the mana there, the blue one, classic. For spells, you cannot cast a lot of spells. Combat is relatively short, like in Dungeons & Dragons 3.5, though Baldur's Gate and Dragon Age Origins are a bit longer. They're a bit longer. This game has particularly short combat cycles, if I had to compare it to Dragon Age Origins and Baldur's Gate, because in those games, I remember that some fights were very prolonged. They were very prolonged. That's another reason why this game is a great recommendation for those that don't have a lot of experience with classic RPG games. But yes, pretty much the idea is that defensive style and offensive style, they consume the stances for melee attackers, consume endurance to give you extra dodge chance or extra accuracy chance in the case of offensive stance. Offensive stance is called. If I remembered it correctly. Offensive stance, for example, for Traldar here, it consumes endurance as he performs basic attacks, and it adds more accuracy, more probability of the attacks landing. In the case of defensive style, it consumes endurance to give you extra dodge chance, and it's kind of like one more resource to depend on to avoid attacks, pretty much. There you can see that I have a critical wound. They can stack up to 5, or you can get a critical wound if the hit was way too hard, and it lowers your stats even more. There you can see that I also have Rotten Stink. When you fight certain types of enemies, the amoebas, you end up being a stinky little brat in that sense, and it lowers your charisma. It doesn't affect your combat. Okay, so pretty much that's it. There you can see that I have some defensive spells that enhance my armor and my attributes. There you have it. There you have the example. There you have all of the attributes lowered. So the economic system of the game. With those resources, it's pretty much that. You use endurance, and you use your spells. Ranged attackers also use endurance. Shouldn't forget that one. And pretty much, I think I covered everything. You can walk, and you will detect traps much easier. And that's pretty much. You can use potions, as you can see there. You can use the Gold Moon Tea to treat the wounds and the poison, because they are not just debuffs of 5 seconds that you can just take some periodic damage for some seconds and be done with it. No, you can also heal yourself. You can also do summons, other stuff. You have potions. You can enhance. I didn't need to use consumables to beat the game. You can use them. But yeah, pretty much that's the idea. You can use some potions, you can craft some better weapons. The crafting system is pretty simple. I explored it by the end of the game, just creating some arrows, and a bow. But pretty much it won't be a game changer at all. Well, I think I covered pretty much everything from role assignment, everything in 1 hour. I think I covered pretty much everything. The game had such abstract complexity that I had to cover all of that. Let's get into the second. So then let's get to the next category of the analysis, shall we, people? Because I think I covered everything regarding combat. The economic system of the game, you just do the quests and get the money. Uh, it's very well managed. If you die, there's no penalty. You reload. It uses a manual save system. In that sense, it doesn't have any penalty like Sacred 2. That's another negative. I think there should always be a negative economic proportion of the gameplay mechanics when you don't perform appropriately. For example, Sacred 2 had that internal clock timer that would enhance your rewards the more you stayed alive. That one is very good. And the most classic example, for example, with Pokemon. In Pokemon, every time your Pokemon dies, it loses 1 point of friendship. Very low, but it's still there. Or in Dark Soul, that you lose your souls, or in Darksiders 3, or those things, or those modern RPG games, precisely. So yeah, I don't like that it doesn't have an economic punishment for pretty much dying, for not performing properly in combat. I don't like that. It's a negative point because it reduces the abstract complexity of the gameplay mechanics. And yeah, the simplicity of the skill tree. And pretty much that's it. I think it's good that the potion system of the game is properly handled, because you cannot just spam endless potions like in Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning. The usage of potions and the influence on the gameplay mechanics is pretty well done. In Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning, the original one, you could just spam potions. Same goes for potions. The same goes for Diablo 3. This game properly manages that. That sounds very, very good. And pretty much that's it. Another economic influence? No, because it has no reward punishment system. That's a negative, of course. And yeah, Baldur's Gate also doesn't have it in that sense regarding this genre. Yeah, it would be an innovation that all games in this genre should do. There's no armor degradation in this game. There's no armor degradation. You don't have to repair your armor like in Star Wars: The Republic or other RPGs. So there's also not even an economic punishment regarding that. Okay, people, let's get into the second category of the analysis. Very, very short in that sense. The technical aspect of it. The technical aspect of the game. Let's get to it. The second category of the analysis is the technical aspect of it. So, remember that for this category, the first thing that we have to take into account is the release year of this game. It's 2008. And I must say, the first thing that we have to concede to this game 100% is that the special effects for the special effects for the spells are all very well done. As you can see, they all have different animations, very, very flashy, very well implemented. The animations properly represent both the magnitude in power and natural element that the spell is meant to represent. In that sense, they cohesively tied the animation of the spell with the description, something very important. For example, the same goes for the melee attacks. For example, when Traldar grabs the hammer and just smashes a skull or something, you can see that even the death animations are very, very well done. But all of these should also be analyzed under the idea that the game doesn't have a lot of melee abilities to animate in that sense. The ones that are animated, they are very well done. They're very well done, very well done. As I've said, the animation properly conveys the significance of the spell description. But it is true that, as I've said, the linearity of the skill tree, the fact that you don't have a lot of abilities to animate, in that sense, it also reduces the complexity of the graphics of the graphical effects of the animations. So if you don't have a lot of abilities to animate, in the case of those spells that are more, we have to do a dissociation there. The game has a lot of spells. Even if the combat ones are quite limited compared to other classic RPG games, that's another thing of the gameplay that I should point out. The spells are quite limited. I used the same ones. In that sense, there were basically 2 levels, not a lot. I remember that in Baldur's Gate, even in the second game, you could still unlock even more powerful spells, but pretty much that's it. It should have this game should have had more spell variety. In that sense, it should have had more spell. It could have had more spell variety, offensive spell variety in that sense, spells variety. But in the case of melee abilities, the same pretty much. The same pretty much. Sorry, there I was doing a pause in the stream. So yeah, pretty much you have to deal with that. That since there's a limited amount of animations, then there isn't a huge variety of things that you have to animate. Compare it to, I don't know, to Sacred 2, with all of the classes having different animations, and here, since they also overlap, they will always be the same. So yeah, there's it's in orders of magnitude lower the amount of animations that they had to do. The ones that they did, pretty well done, pretty well done. So it's a matter of having high quality and low quantity for the melee abilities and the offensive spells in that sense, and also affect the animations. Let's get into the texture resolution. Very high for 2008. Very high for 2008. Very well done. The game has a single technical problem, which is that you need to get the good old games version, just like with Sacred 2, because that's the version in which they fixed the full screen problem in modern Windows 10 or 11 devices in that sense. So be sure to get the good old games version. It's nowhere as broken as Sacred 2. It had only one memory leak crash, I believe, very specific, but the game doesn't crash at all. It's very stable. The only problem is if you get the Steam version, you may need full screen. To play it full screen, you will need borderless gaming, and of course I think I modded the executable to play at 1080p at a higher resolution. So in that sense, it could use a remaster. In that sense, for the resolution, it gets up to 1080p, and I think even this one I could push it to 1440p, so it's actually unlocked if you mod it. So yeah, the base experience, we need to lower some points of the score because the base game doesn't get by default, the stock version doesn't get, the unmodded version doesn't have unlocked resolutions. It does have unlocked frame rates. It does have unlocked frame rates regardless of resolution. I could play at 120, 100 and something, pretty much above 60 comfortably, which is a lot for 2008. So very well done. In that sense, the resolution, you may encounter some issues. You'll have to mod the game a bit for it to look as good as this, but I don't recall it being that difficult. It's just that you don't have the option in the normal menu screen of the game. You just have to toy a bit with the the configuration file manually. It's kind of like the least troublesome case. In other cases, you have to do hex edition of the executable because it's hard-coded. In this game, it's not hard-coded, so I have to make a distinction between games that required hard coding to make it run at analog resolutions, and this one because it doesn't. It's not the case. Alright, for resolutions and frame rates, graphical effects, the artistic portion of the game is very, very good. Something that I've highlighted with another viewer over at YouTube, that the game has a goldish tint to it, very distinctive of games from this generation and the 6th generation. This one would be 7th. Very distinctive because ambient occlusion wasn't so realistic. Nowadays, ambient occlusion and shadows all go for the same style of being realistic. That's why a lot of modern games all look the same, because they go for realistic shadows. This game goes for a goldish tone that fits perfectly, and the ambient occlusion, when I say ambient occlusion, is how they handle the shadows of the game at an engine level. That, for example, Knights of the Old Republic, Advent Rising, Halo 1, all of those games from the 6th generation, they all had that distinctive tone, that tint to them that was very, very, very specific. It was very, very specific to them. So pretty much it gives them a lot of personality that a lot of more games precisely don't have. I was discussing it with a viewer over at YouTube, that the tint of the game, you see that modern games don't have a tint. Well, that's because back then the shadows were placed manually. Nowadays they just use a shadow system that generates all of them kind of like equally. In this game, older games had a tint to them besides the color palette that they chose. For example, this one chose a very goldish color palette and also a goldish reddish tint in some cases. That's why you can see that it looks like that, this ambience here. Alright, people. Alright, so the bloom is very well done. The bloom, how brightness in some special effects is handled is very, very good. The bloom, very well done. So in terms of the graphical aspects of the game, there, for example, you can see that those shadows here that are casted from these ones, from this broken pillar, with the source light coming from here, these 3 shadows were manually placed by the developers. Modern games don't do that. Just as a quick example, they don't do that. The shadows are handled automatically by the engine on a general level. In this case, the tint that I'm praising so much and the shadows that are casted here, they were placed manually. The same goes for the 2D textures in the background that the game has for a lot of cases. Very well integrated. The cohesion of the 2D background when compared to the 3D models in the foreground, you can see it in the dark forest of the portion of the stream. You can see it if you look at the distance, just like with the Lord of the Rings War in the North, the cohesion between the 2D background, for example, having the sky and some terrain, with the foreground in a 3D model, I don't know, a mountain or something like that, it's perfectly combined. That's a very interesting feature that you can see in a lot of modern games, and it's not handled properly because they rely so much on 3D models. They have lost, a lot of developers have lost the ability to care about the cohesion between the distant 2D background and the 3D foreground objects that they have, that they don't match the images in a cohesive way. For example, you have the sky and a 3D model without any transition of terrain, of adding some to the texture of transition of terrain. I know it's a very abstract and subtle topic, but it adds to the cohesion of the ambience and, at the end of the day, the artistic quality of the final product. Because at the end of the day, then, it's a mistake that I see in a lot of cases, because they rely on modern solutions of the shadow system of the game. As for the rest, as I've said, the resolution, you will need to mod the executable, but it's not hard-coded. You won't need to do hex edition of the executable to reach unlock resolutions, so it does have, we need to lower the score a bit regarding that, but still it's not the worst case scenario. So people, with that, I think I covered everything regarding the artistic quality and the technical aspect of the game. It can give you some issues if you choose the Steam version, because you will need borderless gaming to play it full screen. So I suggest the Good Old Games version in that sense. That shouldn't give you those issues. Alright, let's get into the third category. Very, very important. After the gameplay, of course. The third category of the analysis, the level design of this game. The first thing that we... Let's get into the level design. The first thing that we should take into account is the proper influence of the level design on the gameplay mechanics, as I was mentioning previously, because it was also part of the other category. The passages are narrow, so they reduce the probability of free casting without being surrounded by enemies and wiping your whole party. So in that sense, the difficulty is properly derived from the influence of the level design on the gameplay mechanics. You don't have a lot of room to maneuver, you won't have a lot of room to cast spells and just dispatch all melee attackers without worrying about the situation a lot. You won't be able to free cast. For example, here you can see the Grown King fight, that I don't have a lot of room to avoid the spells, and then you will see that he will make summons there. For example, see how surrounded my party is. It's very, very important. This is something that reviewers don't give a damn about, and it's essential to the quality of the abstract complexity of the gameplay mechanics in an RPG. See how surrounded my party is with those summons. There's barely any room to maneuver and free cast my spells from a safe distance. Very, very interesting and important. There you can see that I have to send my archer to that corner in order to not be killed because of, and this is a very interesting relationship, the second influence of the level design. The strict role assignment properly influences the level design. Why? Because since ranged attackers and spellcasters are squishy, being surrounded turns into a much bigger issue. It turns into a much bigger issue for you because of the strict role assignment. And you must be thinking, well, but that's evident, Eraser. Who doesn't realize that at all? It's evident. No, it's not that evident. I always say, people, the subtle elements are the ones that subtle elements and inventions are the ones, for example, a fork or a spoon, the ones that take the highest amount of effort to develop, because we take them for granted so easily, precisely. And in this case, the strict role assignment that they did is also positively influenced by the narrow passages, because as you can see there, it's forcing my ranged attacker to run away. Now, the problem with this is the artificial intelligence that you get by default. Here there's another component that we have to introduce, which is the efficiency of the artificial intelligence. In that sense, the artificial intelligence is not that bright by default. It's not that bright, but once you mod it, it will target your weakest, but most dangerous. Weakest in the sense that they aren't tanks, that they are squishy, but highest damage dealers. In that sense, it will target your highest damage dealers immediately. So I suggest you play with artificial intelligence mod on. By default, and it's what I need to analyze, the game does not target them, and that's a defect that we need to account for. So yeah, pretty much it should definitely, if that should have been addressed from the get-go, the artificial intelligence difficulty, um, it would have been even much better. I think that was a lost opportunity as a negative aspect. As the positive aspects, the level design is very well done, getting into other aspects that are unrelated to combat. For example, the quest distribution. You will have a lot of side quests to deal with. They are preclusive. Once you leave a certain area, you won't be able to go back and finish them. It's a bit limited regarding that, but the variety of side quests is very high. You will have a lot of side quests, some with amazing puzzles, some with very interesting bosses. Then you'll have pretty much everything. They're related to the different classes of the game. They have different stories. They are very well executed. Um, in that sense, and one thing that I highlighted by the end of the analysis is that the side quest distribution is non-linear. It's non-linear, which is a very positive trait that this game has. Have you noticed that modern games, I've said this, they are more linear and precisely preclusive, but not regarding the area, but the length of the side quest itself. They are a bit more, they are much more linear in modern games than they were back then. Think about Mass Effect, please. Think about Dragon Age Origins. Think about Baldur's Gate. In those games, you could begin a quest right at the early game gameplay mechanics, the tutorial or the first zone or whatever. You could get a side quest there and then only finish it by the end game gameplay mechanics of the game. Then we can then you would be forced to finish it by the end of the game by the end game of the game, basically by the end of it, in the final zone or something like that, or not the final zone but close to the end. And that non-linear development of side quests is very positive. It speaks volumes of the quality of the developers, of how they were precisely masters of the genre in that sense. Because nowadays we see games in which you start a quest and you have the area in which you have to farm. That's the structure. To finish the quest immediately right there. Like, it's not like in classic RPGs in which you start a quest, then other things happen, other arcs happen, other stories happen, and then you go back to it, and that adds a lot of natural feeling and cohesion, so that the world of the game feels alive. It feels alive because of it. It feels alive because of it. Because of how perfectly natural it feels that you start a quest, just like in real life, you start something, then you get to do other things, and then you go back to it. It's absolutely amazing that they managed to reach the exemplar quality of Baldur's Gate in that sense. Baldur's Gate is like that. You start a quest and then you can finish it. You can start a quest right at the beginning of the game, and then you don't know if you will finish it, kind of like a side quest, and then you don't know if you will finish it even by the end of it. It's absolutely majestic what they do there. It's absolutely fascinating how they manage to properly tie the plot points of side quests like that. You have very amazing an amazing enemy variety in that sense. You have amazing enemy variety, from groms to spiders to rats. It could be better, it's true. Maybe amazing was a bit too far. Let's say middle quality in terms of enemy variety. A lot of recycling with the rats and the amoebas and everything. Um, it's good. It's definitely there, but it's not perfect. It's not perfect. Good, above average, we would say, but yeah, pretty much. It could have used better enemy variety. So you have the rats, you have the amoebas, you have the thieves. There are a lot of human opponents, witches, etc. Well, lizard men in that sense that they were actually dragonlings. I call them lizard men. You have the Amazons, everything pretty much. Well, enemy variety could have been a bit better, but quest variety was perfect in that sense. It has a lot of side quests. So, yeah, pretty much you could say that the level design is above average because of what I said, that you can be in a quest at the beginning and then finish it by the end. Better enemy variety could have been amazing. It could have improved the score in that sense. Better, as I've said, higher complexity of the skill tree. And yeah, for the most part, the strict role assignment positively influences the game, the party system of the game and everything. Yeah, pretty much. In terms of the level design, I think I'm not forgetting anything. The difficulty, as I've said, the biggest negative aspect regarding the level design, the difficulty could have been better with the artificial intelligence, as I've said. It should have been better, so that's a weak point, the artificial intelligence and the difficulty. We'll group it all together. And pretty much it uses, as a general rule of thumb, Baldur's Gate level design, which is semi-open world. It doesn't have an open world. They created kind of like four or five maps, 4 or 5 huge maps that you explore. You can enter some buildings in the main city of Furdock. Basically, in terms of the structure of the level design, you go to Furdock, which is the main hub. Then you go through the 3 pilgrimages to Moorbridge Marshes, then the Dark Forest again, and then the Castle Grimtooth, and then the City of the Dwarves as a 5th one, and that's pretty much it, because from there all of the dungeons of the game are derived from those 5 locations. So you have 5 semi-open world locations. It's not open world. There you have another example of the shadows being manually casted there, manually projected there, not casted. It would have been cast in that sense. Manually projected there. But yeah, pretty much 5 main semi-open world maps. As you can see, for example, this one is inside of the Dwarf City. Then the Dwarf City has the biggest dungeons. It has like 3 dungeons in one, in that sense. And yes, that's pretty much it in terms of the level design. It's 5 semi-open world games. The length of the game is good for a classic RPG. It's not as long as, it's not as brutal as Baldur's Gate, but it's on par with Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2. Dragon Age Origins is it's a bit longer, not much longer. Baldur's Gate is the one that is insanely long on the highest difficulty, because you'll have to reload, you'll have to do a lot of things. That says. Okay. I think I covered pretty much everything. Regarding the level design. As a general conclusion, it's very, very good. In that sense, it follows the classic BioWare formula. There's one detail regarding the influence of precisely the genre classification that I had been mentioning of Dungeons & Dragons 3.5, which is that the concept of farming is not present in this game. It's not present in this game like in all 3.5 Dungeons & Dragons games. Here, let me this so you can see the dialogue system of the game in that sense. It doesn't incorporate the concept of farming precisely because it's influenced by Dungeons and Dragons 3.5, and in that sense, how do they handle farming in the very same way as Dragon Age Origins? And in the case of Baldur's Gate, no, because that one, Baldur's Gate 1 is actually open world. It's actually open world. So pretty much because of how Dragon Age Origins handles level design, it's exactly the same case. The concept of farming is incorporated when you travel between semi-open world maps. That's how it's handled, because they need to ensure that this is a problem. They need to ensure that the player can get enough experience to not be completely stuck. That's why they give you that message of, are you sure you want to leave this zone without farming a bit more, pretty much? So yeah. Can you finish the game without doing the side quests? It would be a challenge in that sense. It would potentially be a challenge because yes, you have to deal. You will have to deal with the fact that if you didn't get enough experience, you may be locked out of a lot of stats. So yes, in that sense, make sure you make use precisely of the manual save system of the game, But as for the rest, even if you skip them, I don't think it would be a huge handicap to beat the final boss of the game. I don't think it would be. I think you could do it if you know what you're doing. If you understood the gameplay mechanics and the rules, you can do it. So the concept of farming isn't there naturally, but the side quests are used as a solution for that, just like in Baldur's Gate and Dragon Age Origins. Pretty much semi-open world, very classic. It could easily pass as an expansion of Dragon Age Origins. This game, it reminds me of Dragon Age Origins 100% in that sense. So, and that's one of my favorite games of all time. But pretty much Dragon Age Origins fixes all of the defects that this game has. The low difficulty, as I've said, the artificial intelligence, pretty much everything. Pretty much everything. In the case of this game, it had to be fixed through modding. The enemy variety, also Dragon Age Origins has much better enemy variety, and yeah, pretty much a solid level design, very classic, very safe in that sense. Very classic, very classic. In that sense, this game does not shake up that category, that influence of the level design category to redefine the level design of the genre it belongs to, of classic RPG at all. Okay, people. Okay. So with that, we covered the level design of the game, and we proceed to the Grandeur category of the analysis. Precisely the dialogue system, and the impact of the dialogue system and the impact of the soundtrack and ambience on the player, character cohesion, and more. So, as a 3.5 Dungeons and Dragons game, once again the genre classification projects its shadow on this category of the analysis. It has a lot of dialogue options, but the game does not provide a lot of alternatives regarding your choices. For example, fighting a completely different boss depending on your dialogue options. It doesn't offer a morality system. It doesn't offer a lot of variety. Also, we should highlight that only the first phrase, no matter how long or short it may be, of each character, only the first phrase is voiced in this game. That's the first thing I will address, because it's the most glaring feature that the game presents you with. They didn't voice all of the characters completely. They are just partially voiced. So it's just like Baldur's Gate. They follow the tradition of Baldur's Gate, that only the first phrase is briefly voiced. And for example, Dragon Age Origins, it has all of the phrases voiced as a contemporary example. Only the first phrase is voiced. They followed the old example of Baldur's Gate, and it was their first game. Of course, their budget wasn't, potentially the budget wasn't the most, the most, yeah, the biggest one possible. So they only voiced the first phrase of each character, and then it's just written dialogue like in Baldur's Gate, exactly like Baldur's Gate in that sense. But that wouldn't be a problem. The problem is that the game doesn't feature a moral choice system that influences the gameplay mechanics. In that sense, no matter what dialogue option you choose, it's still the same outcome. You will do the same story, the same everything, except for some very, very secondary things, like for example, getting more information from from a priest in Talon. I remember that you could know where a beast came from, but it can make the quests easier in that sense, for that matter. So it's even worse because it makes the game even easier, and it's already enough. It's still extremely easy. It's already extremely easy in that sense. So pretty much, the idea is that the dialogue options don't have a direct influence of the gameplay mechanics. So the Grandeur category is dissociated from the gameplay category. In that sense, they should have added moral choices. Like in Knights of the Republic, or like Baldur's Gate, they should have added alternative encounters depending on those moral choices. And that would have given them, much more weight to when the player to the decisions of the player. In that sense, they should have given much more weight to the decisions of the player. Here you feel like whatever you choose, it will end up being the same, and pretty much that's it. Okay, so that's for the dialogue option. So no moral system. You can get better prices. You can haggle. You can some natures influence it. For example, if you are an elf, or if you are something, or if you are human, some characters react differently. But that's pretty much it. Don't expect the complexity of something like Baldur's Gate or for example Planescape Torment, that you can avoid entire combat sections because of it. This game is not like that. It's not like, or you can, I don't know, face different bosses according to what you choose. I don't know, or different characters or whatever according to what you choose. No, it's very simple, and it gives you some basic options in that sense. Role players won't be satisfied with that. Oh well, that's not what we are, people. So that's the case. Okay. Getting into the ambience and character cohesion, that's impeccable. Characters act according to their personality. There's a cultural trait of this game. A very marked cultural trait of this game that makes it clearly German. It has a clear cultural trait. You can see that it has a distinctive Germanic influence, because there's one case in which you can opt to deal with some witches or help the local church of the game. There's a cultural component there that is inherited from how Germanic tribes originated in real life against particularly the Roman Catholic uh, influence of the Roman Empire, precisely from the south, that was the dominating power, precisely that the Germanic tribes, precisely there's a clear influence that got through the Middle Ages and Protestantism baked into the culture that was clearly present in the mind of the developers when creating this game. And of course, I don't judge that at all, but it is true that since the game aims to be a German game, and it precisely tends to act with the morality system inherited from a Germanic tribe society, the characters act perfectly according to their personality. It's no surprise that for any middle-aged Germanic Bavarian, anything that had to do with the expansive Italian Roman Catholic Roman Empire precisely was seen as terrible. It's absolutely natural in that sense, and even more with the rise of Protestantism and everything. But in this case of paganism, in that sense of not obeying gods. The other thing is that, on the other hand, there's a constant middle-age reference to the gods of the game. So there you can see the perfect example of perfectly how Germanic tribes tried to replace the try to replace the god of Roman Catholic culture perfectly perfectly executed. It's perfectly executed. It's what a middle age. The game perfectly depicts what a middle age Germanic civilian would think on average of the church and those and of the Roman Catholic Church and those things. It's perfectly executed. It leans on a much more Protestant mindset in that sense, into a much more Protestant mindset that, of course, wasn't dominant back then, and it shows because of how the game also includes a lot of churches, and that sense it perfectly depicts Middle Ages. The developers were definitely very cultured, and they had to do a lot of research and development to properly depict the relationship between state and, well, not state, the Middle Ages concept of hierarchy, of societal hierarchy, and how a society organizes, and divinity and the church and everything, pretty much very well executed. It's a German game, so it acts like a German game 100% of the time. In that sense, it gives you options when you get to the Dark Forest. It's the highest point of freedom that the game will give you if you want to fight the church or the witches. In that sense, it gives you an idea, and it's even very well represented, because even if the Church of Prayers was kind of like infiltrated by the dragon links, then by the end of that arc, you can see that one of the priests actually was a normal believer, and he said that he would take the church to, he would take the church, he would command the church in a normal way, rather than what the infiltrated dragonling was doing and whatever. So culturally, it's a very rich game from both perspectives that it can be seen. Well, of course, naturally for me, you must imagine that I sided with the Inquisition to purge the forest of bandits and criminals in that sense, and the witches that were abducting men from random settlements there in the Dark Forest. Just to, it was the highest point of moral choices that the game had, the Dark Forest, the second pilgrimage. So in that sense, that is a highlight, an exception. But as for the rest, you don't have a lot of choices, and as I've said, culturally very rich. The developers did their research on development. They did they weren't like a lot of sadly modern illiterate developers that that it is evident that they haven't read in a lot of cases a single book of history or philosophy or whatever. Sadly, it should be mandatory, because otherwise then you don't understand how cultures viewed the world back in their heyday. You in a lot of modern games we have medieval characters acting like a person who would live in the present, and they call it artistic freedom, just to excuse their lack of research and development in terms of history and philosophy, to see how they would react. An inquisitor, for example, any Roman Catholic character would never accept I don't know, a lot of modern things that we see nowadays in modern games, or etc, etc, etc. Characters don't act according to their personality, and no, creative freedom is not an excuse to not do research and development according to the time period it was in. But I wanted to create something very science fiction, blah 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 blah. Yeah, you can create science fiction with characters acting according to their personality and their nature, in that sense. And that is respected here in that sense, 100%. And then I have to take care of the ambient. See, for example, there, in terms of the graphics, see the 2D background there. This is a perfect example. I should have used this image for the graphical aspect. See how it has one layer up there, then 3 layers of mountains, and then the clouds and the fog, until it matches the terrain. See this perfect example of 2D background with 3D background. How that perfect combination is handled. The snow effect is very well done, and as I've said, going back to the Grandeur category, the ambience and the cohesion, as you can see, it works perfectly. The dwarves are the dwarves. The Church of Prayos is the Roman Catholic Church, clearly, and the non-believers are clearly a perfect influence of Middle-aged Germanic tribes influence. Perfectly executed. I think they must have even used history books to develop the game in a lot of cases. Good. See, that's very important. Not ensuring that the developers are not illiterate, like in a lot of modern cases. Sadly, absolutely sadly, when that happens. Okay. The ambience is pretty well done, and the soundtrack of the game is very low on variety. This is a negative aspect, just like the enemy variety that is low enemy variety, low soundtrack variety. When, if there's something positive that the game does, is that even if it has a low variety, every time you enter combat, the soundtrack activates. I love that. I would make that mandatory in every single game, even in MMORPGs, even in Star Wars: The Republic, in Warcraft, in all of them. The second you enter combat, epic music, epic soundtracks should activate immediately. It has a very good combat soundtrack. It has some variety, one for each zone, pretty much just like in Baldur's Gate. Very limited in that sense. It was a limitation from this period of time, and the game is influenced by those common practices. And the positive part is that it does activate the soundtrack every time that you enter combat. That's something that some games don't do, and it's a critical flaw in my opinion, and pretty much you can see why. They should trigger the soundtrack immediately, because the idea is to give cohesion to that ambience that you are visually reproducing, that you are visually showing to the player. The quality of the soundtrack is okay. It has some. It could have been more epic. I like more epic orchestral soundtracks in that sense, but it's there and it activates when it needs to activate, which is the important thing. More variety would have been amazing, but it does the basics. It's not a critical flaw. It does the basics. They knew how to cover the basic problems, the basic potential problems that could happen with the soundtrack. Like, for example, like I see a lot of modern RPGs in which, for example, I was playing Jedi Fallen Order the other day with a Molgus mod from Sutor precisely to play as Mogus, but it's the same game. And sometimes when you enter combat, the same goes for Dark Souls and a lot of other cases. Darksiders 3, for example, you don't have soundtrack. You don't have soundtrack. You have an ambience soundtrack a bit, but then you don't have soundtrack as you engage in battle. For me, that's terrible. That's terrible. That's terrible. Why? Because it destroys the synchronization of the cohesion of the visual cohesion with the auditive cohesion of the gameplay of the ambience of the game. The cognitive cohesion that you can have of the game can be either visual or auditive in that sense through the sound of the game. And if they are not properly balanced, if you have good graphical cohesion, like what I said about the 2D backgrounds or characters acting according to their personality, is okay, but then you have a non-existent soundtrack when you engage combat, and it's not properly balanced. So the game is basic, but at that basic level of soundtrack cohesion and visual cohesion, at that basic level, it is properly synchronized in visual and sound auditive synchronization. They are properly synchronized. In that sense, pretty well balanced. Good. In terms of the plot and the story, perfect, perfectly executed, amazing world building with the Dragon King, how it slowly reveals the story, how the Dragon King is imprisoned by his son, and he's trying to take the world and everything. The pacing of how the plot is revealed, it's amazing because it keeps interesting until the very end. Until the very end. In terms of the plot, I have to give it 10 out of 10 in that sense, in that specific regard. The plot is perfectly executed. I would say a bit above Baldur's Gate. I really liked how they handled the plot. A very, very high point there, how they handled the plot and the plot of side quests. I like how they slowly managed it. There's a bit of recycling in the sense that it's just like Gorion in Baldur's Gate 1, that your master is killed at the beginning of the game. It's the only recycling, the biggest recycling I can think about. But as for the rest, the villains are properly done, are properly executed. They slowly reveal themselves, and you don't even get to know a lot of the villains up until the end of the game. I love that by the end of the game, you are referenced back to the very intro of it, with the Cyclops forging the hammer and everything. It's very well synchronized in that sense, making a direct reference to the beginning, to the very intro of the game. So it's very, very, very well done. In that sense, the plot is one of the highest points I have seen. I think more or less here I started doing the fights. Then I realized that I had to go over there. In that sense, it's perfectly executed. Perfectly executed. The plot, I cannot complain about anything at all. Anything at all. So as you can see, this game has some very amazing ideas, and the bad ideas are very well covered. The bad ideas, the clear budget limits, because they are clearly budget limits. For example, not voicing all of the dialogue lines. It's a direct budget limit. They knew how to cover their mistakes. This is something that I don't see. It's very subtle, very subtle, very abstract as well, quite abstract, and it's something that I don't see frequently. That a game knows how to perfectly cover, as much as possible, all of the glaring flaws that it may present. In that sense, very well done. Okay, so with that, the plot perfectly. I won't go over the whole plot of the game because it's very long, but yeah, basically, it's a tale of dragons at the end of the day. Very well executed, very original, very original. And the only regret I have is that we couldn't fight the Drakensang King at the end of the game. But yeah, I think it was more than enough with the 9 pilgrimages before us, and this one being the definitive one, and saving the world and everything with the Cyclops. The thing that impacted me the most is that you reached kind of like the chamber of the intro sequence of the game by the end of it. So that's something that we don't see most of the time. Not even Baldur's Gate did that. Not even that. You just see uh, Sarabok throwing a guy of a building, something like that. The intro of Baldur's Gate, the original one. So in that sense, it tells you a lot about the quality of the writing. In that sense, very cohesive, very cohesive. It's there. It plays a very good role. So it's amazing. Being a much more predominant element in the classic RPG genre rather than the isometric action RPG genre, for example, with something like Secret 2, the element is properly handled. The element is properly handled. It's on. It reminds me of Knights of the Old Republic in a sense, the story, in some ways. I would have incorporated a bit more of philosophy, but well, that would be just me. There's no need to ask that as a requirement for the game. So the soundtrack, in that sense, low point, not a lot of variety, a lot of enemy variety as well in the level design. But yeah, the game knows those um, how to cover those mistakes in that sense. So very good Grandeur in that sense, and we get to the final category of the analysis, people. The innovation. The innovation. The things that the game does to redefine the mechanics of the genre it belongs to. So, pretty much, pretty much, it's a safe game. It's a safe game if we're talking about the innovation, how it redefines the mechanics of the genre it belongs to. It's a safe game. It recycles a lot of mechanics from Baldur's Gate, from, well, it wasn't there yet, but Dragon Age Origins, from Knights of the Old Republic. From Knights of the Old Republic, it recycles a lot of the mechanics from the combat system to how it handles the plot even. But there's one point that I mentioned at the beginning regarding the gameplay category of the analysis that is very, very original. It's quite original. It's quite original. The armor system. The armor system and the fact that each zone of the body of the armor, yeah, the armor zones are called. Every part of the body is a different armor zone, and that different abilities, melee abilities specifically, are directed at different zones of the body, of the armor points of the body, and it's handled differently. That's something unique of this game. I haven't seen it in any other game. I don't like that the game doesn't feature an elemental resistance system. I don't like that it doesn't feature an elemental resistance system at all. It doesn't feature it at all. That damage doesn't cause different types. Like you can be burned, but it doesn't feature different types of elemental damage that are handled differently by different elemental resistances at all. It's not done at all. There isn't an elemental system, even if you can be burned or poison or whatever. But the magnitude of the damage, the efficiency of the damage is not mitigated. By an elemental resistance system at all. The game doesn't feature that. It doesn't feature shields. Shields in the sense of having some points of damage that you can absorb. It doesn't feature any of those things. It doesn't feature a defensive or offensive elemental system, which that lowers the abstract complexity a lot. It just has a higher abstract complexity by a bit in the armor system, because as I've said, the abilities are aimed at different zones of the armor that are separated, they are dissociated in that sense. So I don't like that it doesn't have an elemental resistance system, it lowers the abstract complexity, and that the skill tree system is very simplistic. It's very simplistic. It could have had much more abstract complexity in the skill tree system of the game. It's very linear. It's very linear. The skill tree system is the most linear I've seen in the genre. So yes, pretty much. It could have done with more abstract complexity there, and pretty much I don't see any innovative element that the game uh, has in that sense. It mimics a tabletop game, and the rules of Dungeons and Dragons 3.5 in that sense. It doesn't shake things up in any regard. It's a very safe, classic game, pretty much, with a very good plot, but without a lot of mechanics that redefine the genre from any perspective, from level design or whatever. For example, I could say that Dragon Age Origins, in terms of innovation, the combat system of Dragon Age Origins incorporates some elements of tab targeting, and Dungeons and Dragons 4.0 is a very special combination. So in that sense, it incorporates some of those. To improve the variety of the combat. This game doesn't have a lot of enemy variety in that sense. Baldur's Gate and Dragon Age Origins and everything, they have much better enemy variety. So yes, pretty much this is a very safe game. Maybe the fact that you can open chests with spells is an odd one. And there is one thing: the fact that 5 stacks of being wounded can knock a character unconscious. Yes, that's a very interesting innovation that they did. Yes, because it properly derives the difficulty from the state system of the game rather than the raw stat system that it has, that I don't know, a boss can kill you in 2 blows. Instead of that, the game properly plays with the idea of stacking 5 points of being wounded, and as a direct consequence of that, knocking a character unconscious and directly destroying the party composition of the strict role assignment of, for example, targeting the ranged attacker, and because of that, the character is killed, and your whole group is unbalanced. Okay, so the states, it's very innovative the way they are handled, and the efficiency, as I've said, the efficiency of the relationship between the state system and the difficulty that is derived from that, they are very well synchronized. The synchronization, as I said, of visual cohesion and sound cohesion that you attack, but that's not precisely revolutionary in that sense. So pretty much, people, you can see that the game is very classic, very safe, and yes, the armor system that you can direct the attacks to a specific part of the body, but there isn't a lot that is new or unheard of in this game. The internal dice roll system itself to cast the spells is a bit more complex than Baldur's Gate, perhaps in that sense. Only the spells, because there's 3 dice rolls, and Baldur's Gate has 1 dice roll even for the spells, and it's not affected by those attributes. In that sense, it's different, but still not enough as to justify an absolute revolution of gameplay mechanics or whatever. Okay, So because of all of that, people, because of all of that, we get to the final part of the analysis, and for that I will get here to the final boss precisely. That if you watch the gameplay mechanics, you know, if you know, sorry, if you watch the previous parts of the analysis, you know it. Basically the idea is that, let's get to the final score and to the conclusions, and the final score is a very safe game. I highly recommend this game to anyone who hasn't experienced the classic RPG genre, because it will be much easier than Baldur's Gate or Icewind Dale or Dragon Age Origins or Knights of the Old Republic. Knights of the Old Republic is another great example. It's another great entry point because it's much easier as well. But still not as easy as this one. I would say that this one is the easiest classic RPG I've played so far, and I played quite a lot. It's quite easy, even more without the AI mod, because it won't target your weak links of your party. So pretty much the idea is that it's a very classic, safe example of a classic RPG game, precisely. So I highly recommend it for those of you who haven't explored the genre, Dungeons and Dragons 3.5, and for fans of Dungeons and Dragons 3.5, without a doubt, and because of the lack of overall difficulty, that not even with the enhanced AI mod you can fix as the most glaring and worst flaw, because of the lack of enemy variety, and because of the lack of soundtrack as well, and the another critical flaw, the second critical flaw, the second one could be considered middle-sized, not minor, because not having perfect enemy variety is not minor, but yes, middle-sized. And then another huge problem is the simplicity of the skill tree. The simplicity of the skill tree that is incredibly linear. Because of all of those, it's still harder than most modern games. A lot of modern games are pretty much brain dead in a lot of cases. But still, for the genre it belongs to, and because of these three flaws, then the counter is, as I've said, the perfect cohesion in the plot and the ambience and the presentation, the graphical presentation. Well, another flaw, the fourth one, the technical flaw, would be that you need to mod it a bit so it works at unlocked resolutions. But for all of those flaws, they were very, except for those two that I've said, the simplicity of the skill tree and the difficulty, they knew how to cover a lot of flaws. They were very precise at covering the flaws of this game. I have seldom seen such a degree of precision. For this game, for covering the flaws of your game. So very good. They knew how to cover the flaws. They knew how to cover a lot of those issues. Positive aspects, as I've said, it's a classic, very classic combat system that if you like Baldur's Gate, you will enjoy it. There's no way you cannot enjoy it if you enjoyed Baldur's Gate and Dragon Age Origins in that sense, because it's the same. It's literally the same. It's solid in its presentation and its plot. I love how the level design of the side quests was designed. In the sense that you can start a quest at the beginning of the game and then finish it by the end of it, something that we don't see nowadays in a lot of cases. And the combat system, while simple, it's engaging. It has a crafting system to complement it that I didn't use a lot, but it's very well executed. The fact that the classes overlap, I don't like it because it destroys replayability in that sense, for another negative. But all of the points that make this game All of the elements that make this game a classic RPG are extremely solid. They're extremely solid. You will have a good time with it. It's like playing Dragon Age Origins with less complexity on an easier mode, let's say. And you have your spells. They are powerful. They're the level 2 spells. I would have added more offensive spell variety in that sense. Um, the melee attacker. One thing that this game does right is, as another conclusion, it finally properly balances melee attackers with ranged attackers. That's something that you won't find in Baldur's Gate. You won't find in Dragon Age Origins. In those games, spellcasters deal much more damage. Here is properly balanced, something that you won't find in 99% of classic RPG games at all. You won't find that. Here, a melee DPS is as efficient as a ranged DPS in that sense. Hence why I made my character a battle mage. And it has a proper straight roll assignment for the limits for the threshold of Dungeons & Dragons 3.5. It's very well balanced in that sense. So because of all of that, measuring the negatives and the positives, I will give Drakensang 1 The Dark Eye, the first entry of Radon Labs, drum rolls, a solid 8.5. It's a solid 8.5. It doesn't get to a 9, but it's a solid 8.5. If you would like to be very, very strict and take all of the defects into account and all of the negatives into account, you could reduce it to an 8, but in my case, I would award it from 1 to 10, 8.5, because I enjoy this style of gameplay, and I think it's a perfect archetype. It's a perfect example of classic RPG. They played it safe, they didn't innovate a lot, but for a first try and measuring the positives and the negatives, the game has a solid presentation and it does what it does correctly. A solid 8.5, just like Hellgate London in that sense of base Hellgate London. Then if you mod it, it's amazing. In that sense, it's very, very clear. Maybe you could push it to 8, lower it to 8 because of the simplicity, but then you would need to address the incredible length that this game provides. It's 20 days of stream with all of the side quests. It's very well executed. It's very well executed. It will give you a good amount of time that is solid. And it will be soundly enjoyable in that sense. So the basics, they got the basics right. It's a clear example of a game that is the first entry, and they got the basics right in that sense. Then I bet they improved all of it in the second entry in that sense. So yes, a solid 8.5. I bet you'll have a lot of fun with it. You may complain about those things. I suggest you use the AI mode and you fix the technical aspect of it. I also consider that in the final score. But yes, it's a solid 8.5, solid 8, let's say, for those who want to be strict. And yeah, from S to F, from F to S, I would qualify that it's a B+ game in that sense. It's a B+ game, solid, but not, let's say, perfectly exceptional in the sense of trying crazy stuff. And it has its shortcomings, either related to budget or related to, I don't know, as I've said, the influence of the moral choice, how they integrated some of the elements, for example, the fact that the moral choices don't affect the gameplay mechanics, or how they integrated the efficiency of, I don't know, the spell system of the game, for example. For example, you cannot cast a fireball spell in a lot of cases because you will damage yourself. Well, that is positive. If they added more spell variety, they could have added, I don't know, a fork lining that, for example, in Baldur's Gate, I think there's something like that you cast a fork lining that you can do AoE damage without, I don't know, without damage your allies, for example. In the form of more spell variety. Or, I don't know, that they allowed you to have more than one summon, and then they balanced the difficulty of the gameplay mechanics for that. They instead said, no, let's limit to one summon, and let's keep the difficulty as simplistic to develop as like that, as one summon, not two summons, and handle the difficulty through the level design organically, which would have been a much better decision. So in that sense, it has those shortcomings, a more varied soundtrack and enemy variety, but it's a solid first entry for a great franchise that still lives on in the form of Drakensang Online. That precisely Flying Energies and District love so much. I would need to try it, because pretty much the second game will be the same as this one, so we'll see what we can do about that. We can try. I'm curious as to how the franchise ended with that one. I'm curious now. Yeah, pretty much. So the franchise still lives on in the form of an isometric action RPG. So I'm always glad and happy when that happens. Sorry, I'm always glad and happy when that happens, when the franchise survives. In that sense, it followed the same fate as another one called Torchlight. So that still lives on, but tried to do an MMORPG. It failed, and this one was successful. So great in that sense. So people, that's it. It's a B+, it's an 8.5, solid qualification there, because it gets the basics right, and it makes a huge effort. This game makes a huge effort in covering its mistakes at the time of trying to be a complete product, and that's something that we have to appreciate a lot. So pretty much I enjoyed my time with it. I recommend it, not highly recommended in the sense that you will feel tired, like you won't play the father of all RPGs, like classic RPGs like Baldur's Gate, if you don't play it. But I think it's a solid entry that everyone should play at least once in their lives. It's a solid entry that you should play. For example, you know that we have the best movies of all time. Then immediately after that, a second grade of B movies that are also mandatory if you want to know the genre. This one is one of them. This one is definitely one of them. This is pretty much the ending. So that we saw the other day, in which the dragon, the son, is possessed by the father, and the world is saved because of that. Well, there you have it. So glad I could share the gameplay of this game with all of you. I'm glad I could share the gameplay of this game with all of you. As I've said, we'll see if we can do something about precisely how the franchise ends. We'll do it. District, if you are watching, we'll see if we can, if I can play it, because I want to analyze the story and how it ends in that sense. So yeah, pretty much I want to analyze the story. It intrigues me. And the second one is pretty much another classic RPG. We can do a skip there. That sense. It's a franchise that has drawn my attention. Without a doubt. And well, classic interpretation, their final happy ending, and the credits roll after this. So people, it's been my pleasure. It's been my pleasure sharing this evening of Drakensang 1: The Dark Eye, the final analysis, with all of you. It's been my pleasure.